Imagine a world on the brink. A single gunshot echoes through the streets of Sarajevo, and within weeks, the great empires of Europe are locked in a death struggle, pulling the entire globe into a conflict unlike any seen before. This wasn't just a war. It was the war to end all wars, a cataclysm that would redraw maps, topple dynasties, and scar the psyche of a generation. This is the story of World War I, told from all sides. So, how did it all begin? The story usually starts with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary on June 28, 1914. But that shot was merely the spark that lit a massive powder keg. For decades, Europe had been a tangled web of alliances, rivalries, and ambitions. Think of it like a neighborhood filled with powerful, paranoid families, all armed to the teeth. On one side, you had the Triple Entente, later known as the Allies. This group was led by France, Russia, and Great Britain. France was still bitter about its defeat to Germany in 1871 and wanted its lost territories back. Great Britain, the world's dominant naval and colonial power, was growing increasingly wary of Germany's rising industrial and military might, especially its rapidly expanding navy. And then there was Russia, the vast, sprawling empire that saw itself as the protector of all Slavic peoples, including the Serbs in the volatile Balkan region. On the other side stood the Central Powers, dominated by Germany and Austria-Hungary. Germany, a relatively new but incredibly powerful nation, felt encircled by France and Russia. Its leaders believed they deserved a place in the sun, meaning more colonies and global influence, which put them on a direct collision course with Britain. Austria-Hungary, a multi-ethnic empire, was struggling to hold its diverse populations together. It was terrified of rising nationalism, particularly from Serbia, which it saw as a direct threat to its stability. The Ottoman Empire, the sick man of Europe, would later join the Central Powers, hoping to regain some of its lost prestige and territory. When a Serbian nationalist assassinated Archduke Ferdinand, Austria-Hungary saw its chance to crush Serbia once and for all. They issued an ultimatum so harsh that Serbia couldn't possibly accept it all. Germany, giving Austria-Hungary a blank check of unconditional support, essentially encouraged them to be aggressive. When Serbia refused to meet all the demands, Austria-Hungary declared war. This is where the dominoes began to fall, fast. Russia, honoring its commitment to Serbia, started mobilizing its massive army. Germany, seeing Russian mobilization as a direct threat, declared war on Russia. Since France was allied with Russia, Germany knew it would have to fight a war on two fronts. Their plan, the infamous Schlieffen Plan, called for a lightning-fast invasion of France through neutral Belgium, knocking them out of the war before turning to face the slow-moving Russian giant. But invading Belgium was a fatal mistake. Britain had a treaty to protect Belgian neutrality. When German troops crossed the border, Great Britain declared war on Germany. Within a few short weeks, all the great powers of Europe were at war. Millions of young men, filled with patriotic fervor, marched off, believing the war would be over by Christmas. They couldn't have been more wrong. The German advance into France was brutally effective at first, but it was halted at the Battle of the Marne. What followed was the stuff of nightmares. Both sides dug in, creating a vast network of trenches that stretched from the Swiss border to the North Sea. This was the Western Front, the symbol of World War I's futility. Life in the trenches was hell on earth. Soldiers lived in mud, surrounded by filth, rats, and the constant threat of death. Days were spent in monotonous terror, punctuated by moments of sheer horror. The command was simple: go over the top. Men would climb out of their trenches and charge across a desolate no-man's land, straight into a hail of machine gun fire and artillery shells. Battles like the Somme and Verdun became synonymous with slaughter. At the Somme, the British Army suffered nearly 60,000 casualties on the first day alone. 4 months of fighting, the front lines barely moved more than a few miles, at the cost of over 1 million lives. The war wasn't just on the Western Front. On the Eastern Front, the fighting was more mobile, but no less brutal. German and Austro-Hungarian forces battled the vast Russian army across huge swaths of land. The Russian army, though enormous, was poorly equipped and led. The staggering losses and widespread hunger on the home front led to revolution. In 1917, the Tsar was overthrown, and later that year, the Bolsheviks seized power. One of their first acts was to pull Russia out of the war, signing a peace treaty with Germany. For the Central Powers, Russia's exit was a huge victory. They could now move all their forces to the west for one final, decisive push. But another global power was about to enter the fight. The United States had remained neutral for the first 3 years, though it was supplying the Allies with weapons and loans. Public opinion began to shift due to Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare. German U-boats were sinking merchant and passenger ships without warning, including the Lusitania in 1915, which killed over 100 Americans. The final straw was the Zimmermann telegram. In this secret message, Germany proposed a military alliance with Mexico, promising to help it reclaim Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona if the U.S. entered the war. The message was intercepted and published. American outrage was immense. In April 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. The arrival of fresh, well-equipped American troops, the Doughboys, tipped the balance of power decisively. At the same time, the Allied naval blockade was strangling the Central Powers. Germany and Austria-Hungary were running out of food, supplies, and, most importantly, men. A final German offensive in the spring of 1918 failed. With their armies collapsing and revolution brewing at home, the Central Powers sought an armistice. At the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, the guns finally fell silent. The world rejoiced, but the cost was staggering. Over 16 million people, soldiers and civilians alike, were dead. For great empires, the German, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, and Ottoman, had crumbled into dust. The aftermath was just as turbulent. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, officially ended the war. But instead of a peace among equals, it was a victor's peace. Germany was forced to accept full blame for the war, disarm its military, give up its colonies, and pay crippling reparations. This war guilt clause created a deep sense of national humiliation and resentment in Germany, sowing the seeds for another, even more devastating conflict just 2 decades later. World War I was a turning point in human history. It introduced new, terrifying technologies of warfare: machine guns, tanks, poison gas, and airplanes. It shattered the old world order and created a new map of Europe and the Middle East, with consequences we are still dealing with today. It left a legacy of physical and psychological trauma, a lost generation of young people whose lives were irrevocably shaped by the conflict. It showed the world the terrifying potential of modern industrialized warfare and left a question that still haunts us: how can we prevent such a catastrophe from ever happening again? Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey into history insightful, please hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. And let me know in the comments what part of this story surprised you the most. See you in the next video.